Come, spell weavers, reavers, rogues, and men-at-arms, and answer the call of adventure. Pick up your sword, your axe, your spellbook, your bow, your rulebook, and your dice, and join the forces of good in their eternal fight against vile monsters, conspiring min-maxers, horny bards, and blood-soaked murder hobos. Discover the treasure trove of role-playing games here on Rollin Bones. My name is Ryan Howard, and I shall be your guide. Good evening, Boneheads, and welcome back to Rollin Bones with Ryan Howard, where we are making old school young again. I'm your host and king of the Boneheads, Ryan Howard, and tonight is going to be very special. This is going to be the first in what will be kind of an ongoing series each month on Rollin Bones, where I will be joined by the man, the myth, the legend, my business partner and best friend in Guts and Glory, Mr. Keelan Halverson, aka the Wonkee. Right now, we are tentatively calling this series Get in the Ring, but since both of us love that name, I think that's what we're going to stick with. And this is just going to be us discussing creative ideas, kind of our creative process, design, all kinds of things in and around creating role-playing games, thinking about role-playing games, and then working as artists and publishers within this industry and within kind of adjacent industries. So that's what we're going to be doing tonight. I'm looking forward to it. This is going to be a great conversation. Before I bring Wonkee on here and we kick this thing off, I want to remind everyone to like, share, and subscribe. That is how you support the work that we are doing here at Rollin Bones, and I hope you guys will contribute in that way just by giving us that little algorithmic bump. That's going to help us, continue to bring this kind of content to y'all if you like it. Also want to remind everyone that you can find me on various social media platforms, including X and Instagram. We are live on X right now. Those are both at Howard_Ryan Gregg. YouTube is Rollin Bones. Twitch is twitch.tv/RollinBonesRyan. And Substack is rollinbones.substack.com. Quick little detail about Substack right now. I have just recently published my first short story over there. That short story is called The Black Dog of Nighthaven. It is set within my game world of Nighthaven. It is available currently for premium subscribers. It is professionally edited, written by myself, and it's me experimenting with new methods of getting my work out there. So if you guys want to see me turn my hand to fiction writing, that's a good place to do it. You can support me just by becoming a premium subscriber over on rollinbones.substack.com, and that'll give you access to this first short story, and there will be more to come. So that's about it for me. Want to remind everyone just Wonkee and I are working on launching something big here with Rollin Bones, and so this is going to be one of the places where you can hear about the ideas that we have and the work that we're doing. So without further ado, let me go ahead and bring on the man of the hour, the man with the power, the man who is too sweet to be sour. You all know him and love him. He is the Wonkee. Welcome back to Rollin Bones, Wonkee.
Too sweet to be sour. I like that. Oh, you got me going with that. Okay, here we go. So, I am excited for this. Thank you for having me here. I have been excited for this episode for pretty much since we started talking about it earlier in the month. Now, for those of you that don't know, we don't really plan our topics that we're talking about too far ahead of time, but I have had time to think and ponder, and I'm so stoked for wherever this conversation leads, because this is the start of our young dudes dungeon design dojo kind of thing. But we're coming at this from the perspective of the student, not the master, and we're kind of, showing what we learn along the way. So I'm excited to kick off this series, and let's get in the ring with it.
Absolutely. And it's funny that you mentioned Design Dojo, because that was my first idea for what do we call this thing. But then thinking about it, we both have an appreciation for Amon Amarth, and that's where Get in the Ring came from.
Good. Oh, that was. I was wondering that when you came up with that name. I was like, ah, that's one of my favorite songs. I got punched in the face to that song at an Amon Amarth show. Great. Okay, fuck yeah. Let's go.
Oh man, that is a great song.
It is. It's fun. Oh, this is exciting stuff, brother. It's good to see
It's good to see you too.
you.
So the topic tonight, I I had a couple loose ideas about where to take things. We have talked a lot about this concept of taking an idea and moving it into something more real, kind of something that you can build a product around or build a game around. And with that, there's always this question of how should I approach my first project? Should I lean more towards kind of what my heart desires, or should I try to be a weather vane for what's popular right now and go in that direction? And so, honestly, what we're dealing with here is almost like the concept of selling out. So let's begin there. Um, when you hear that phrase "selling out," what does that conjure up in your mind?
Not the thing we're going to be talking about primarily, I imagine. What I think of when I hear selling out is big rock bands that don't make the music I like anymore because they're with the big record companies, and we can talk about that for sure. Um, but that's primarily what comes to mind first is that idea of, they got too big, they've blown out, and they've lost grasp of what their roots were, where they came from, what were they doing with this creative endeavor, let's say. Because I
Mhm.
think selling out, maybe not, I'm not too sure, is tied to at least some kind of an endeavor. It has to be. Or maybe values. It really. See, that's the hard thing is where do we even begin in defining something like this? Is how do you decide what you want to do and how you're going to pursue that? And
Yeah, and the reason why I start with that framework and that conception is a lot of people have ideas in their heads of I think this would be cool. And I think a lot of those ideas kind of die before they even have a chance to be born because people go, nobody wants to do that without thinking, maybe people don't know what they want. Maybe people don't realize this is something that's cool. And so they take an idea that they're really passionate about and they just kind of throw it in the garbage can and then say, I'm going to pursue this avenue that's popular right now. And I'm going to take my creative energy and instead of focusing on this idea that I'm really passionate about, I'm going to, push that aside. Maybe I'll come back to it. All reality, probably never going to come back to it. And I'm going to pursue kind of this path of least resistance.
I can only speak from my own experience on that, and that is not my personal experience. I imagine that is primarily what happens to a lot of people. Mine was I was so unsure if my idea was going to be likable, palatable enough, or, imposter syndrome kind of tangential to the point where it was if I would be able to live up to these standards and live up to the shoulders of giants. And so instead of I guess, watering down or skipping. I just didn't do anything at all. I stood with stage fright for about a decade while I decided what do I want to do for my first project? How am I going to go about this? I was scared of everything that comes with making a big creative project or endeavor.
Mhm. Yeah, and honestly, that was a big thing for me as well. Is I never had this idea in my mind of I want to latch on to the thing that's currently popular, but it was this. Malachi in chat makes a good point. I've heard similar comments from Victor Gorchev, even recently. With all the success that he's had, there's this fear of. Oh, I'll come back to that in just a minute, Dunder Moose. But there's this fear of um, I'm going to put this thing out here that I love and that I'm really passionate about. Are people going to immediately mock me for it? Or worse, are they going to completely ignore me?
This is true. And then there's a thing that I more personally was experiencing, and it's this doesn't live up to the standards of the heroes that have come before. I know I'm not going to be able to do it. Why bother at all? Was a huge part of it, is actually having the personal courage to step in and make the decision to follow through with doing something. That's a hard decision to make.
Yep. Yeah, and the reality of the situation for anyone who creates is that first thing you put out there, and I experienced this firsthand. We both did with O Night Divine. Um, that as we've told people, O Night Divine was our test flight. That was our proof of concept that we could put something out there.
That's true.
When I released it, I was pretty proud of the work that we had done to get it out there. And
You
then
should be.
taking a look at the reception, especially this really clicked into perspective when our editor Stephen Clements took a look at Oh Night Divine and gave his very honest, uh, very scathing criticism of it.
I liked it. I
I
loved
did
his
too.
criticisms. It was so brutal and raw. It was, a rasp. It wasn't even sandpaper abrasive. That was a rasp. But I loved it because he didn't bullshit around the points of like, hey, first off, you need an editor.
Yep.
There was so much. As long as you are thick-skinned enough to take a good critique, being able to run with the information that you're lacking and do something with that, someone's shining a flashlight on holes you're missing. It's your job to patch that up. And so, like, I'm very thankful he did that because that's going to be a great uh, improvement for future projects all around.
Yep.
Products. Look at me go. Big businessman right here. Products.
And then Dundermoose here in chat actually has a decent point, and this is something to maybe talk about for a little bit. Um, the thing that he says here, you know what kills a person's good idea dead as a hammer? If you say, "Oh, that's just like X movie or short story or thing that I saw." I've seen
Yeah.
brilliant writers deflate over that comment.
I feel that in my heart. That was a huge thing for me. Is like
Yep.
uh, why do we fear being compared to even masterpieces, great projects, great products, great things, IPs we love? Why is there that fear of comparison? Now, I'll speak a little out of turn. I hope I don't mind, or you don't mind here. But initially going into Guts and Glory, you were a little bit hesitant. Like, I am so like Lonkmar in a lot of ways. I don't want to compete with that same role. And, how have you emotionally dealt with that? I want to kind of delve into that a little. Is that okay?
Yeah. So you make a good point there. When I was first conceiving of Nighthaven, the idea was this is going to be a city setting that I am going to put with the Dungeon Crawl Classics rules. And then I discovered that Dungeon Crawl Classics had Lankmar, and that's really where this kind of death by comparison came in. Um, but yeah, there is something to that. This idea that it's all been done, and this kind of chase for originality. The thing that a lot of people have to realize, and this is a thing that I've had to realize, everything is derivative. Everything comes from something else. What you need to focus on as a creative is not, can I come up with something whole cloth original with no direct comparison anywhere? You take something that you're passionate about, and I'll use the example of Star Wars. I know it's kind of a played out example. When you look at Star Wars, you've got a very clear synthesis of George Lucas's love for samurai movies, Frank Herbert's Dune, and westerns. And out of that comes something different, something unique, something that we're still talking about today. And so when you look at your project, even if it's reminiscent of something, even if it's reminiscent of something very popular, find avenues and other pieces of inspiration that you can take from, and think of it almost like you're creating your own Frankenstein's monster. You're going to take pieces from a bunch of things that you like. You're going to put them together in such a way that once you kind of give it that jolt of creativity, it's able to come to life and sustain itself. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Interesting, interesting. I like I like where you're going, especially with that Frankenstein thing, because essentially that is what we're doing. We are creating thematic game spaces and game environments, elements, everything else that goes into it, but we are necessarily a genre that rewrites the wheel too often.
Mhm.
And I'm by no means pointing fingers at anyone in particular, but a lot of the fantasy genre is incredibly derivative, especially of itself. Especially in modern days. We're seeing this weird. Now, I like to think of it as when you are creating something in the Frankenstein way, sure, yeah, that's a little grotesque of a way to think about it. I like to think about it more of what are my like creative parents I'm pulling from? What kind of a
Yeah.
baby do they make? And then from that seed of an idea, what do you do to prune it into the tree it needs to become? I like where you're going with the Frankenstein idea. I'm trying to figure out a way to work my analogy into yours because that's
Mhm.
just cool. I kind of want to go with it.
Yeah.
Um,
I
but yeah, I see where you're saying, and it's true though. You do have to pick like everything's kind of a recycled element of something else. There's very few unique experiences, and if you can pull from whatever little things here and there, that might be amazing. People will love that, but you know, there's also the familiarity aspect. You don't want to be too unique. If you go off into a weird, super outer dimensional, time warping aliens made of hellfire lava beams, you're going to lose people because at one point or another, you need some kind of a touchstone to pull from, right?
right. Yeah. And Malachi here in chat has
Oh,
posted
I love it.
something.
Tell me.
This kind of relates to like the hex crawl. When you're rolling for random hexes and you end up getting a castle in a swamp.
That's where I want to live, baby.
Yeah, that there is this kind of fear of mishmash or mismatched components, rather. This idea that everything has to cohesively fit together and flow naturally. Um,
That's a horrible way of thinking about
it
it. I
is.
think those are the real design challenges and where you can take your own personal experiences and everything else and what you think about these separate elements and what you can do to fill the cracks. You are, as the creator, filling the grout spaces between, you know?
Yep. Yeah, the best creative problem to have is these two things should not be together and yet they are. Now
Mm-hmm.
explain why.
True.
This is great in a role-playing environment when you're just at the table rolling on a random table. This is great when you're writing a novel. You've got things that come together that ought not to be in the same place, and now it's on you to kind of explain how this circumstance came about. That that's intrigue. That's the beginning of, in the tabletop context, emergent story. In the context of, fiction writing or something like that, story.
Right. And I think the believability scale of that from hokiness to like, damn, that's a really cool idea, it just comes down to the amount of time and effort you spend thinking about it, working it out. Grab a whiteboard. What are those graphs called where you write something out and then kind of spider web out from it? I do that with like every thought I have, and it's like the most efficient way I've found to think because you can kind of backtrack and rework things and it's so efficient as far as being able to combine separate ideas and just see how things unfold as you go out from there.
Mhm.
Sorry if I'm being really all over the place. I'm so
Oh no,
excited for this talk.
no, it's all good. But yeah, like there's there's this idea of kind of contrasting flavors that you get from, and I'm gonna go off of my own little nerdy niche here and talk a little bit about cooking.
Perfect.
there's this, like, when you're creating a dish, the idea that all the elements have to combine together is like saying, here is a dish where all of the elements are sweet, or all of them are savory, all of them have an umami flavor, all of them are bitter. What you're going to do when you try to build a dish that way is you're going to overwhelm the palate with one sensation. When you are making a well balanced dish, you want to give multiple sensations that counter each other in interesting ways. So if you have a sweet element, you want to cut the sweetness with a little bit of bitterness. If you have too much bitterness, you want to maybe add some tartness or some kind of vinegariness. Um, there's lots of different combinations of flavor that you can put on a plate and create a cohesive meal where there are contrasting elements present that all kind of complement each other.
Right.
In any kind of creative endeavor, that's also what you want to do, because you don't want everything to be monochromatic. You don't want everything to be the same shade. You have to have contrasting shades so that certain details pop out. And it's where you put those contrasting shades, where you draw people's eyes or where you draw their brains. If you're talking about, the written word, this is where like actual creation comes about. It's not about making everything one homogeneous mixture. It's about these elements that stand out from each other.
Absolutely. And we actually spent, for those of you who haven't seen it, a real good amount of time for our Halloween episode here on Rollin Bones, talking about how to add horror into a role playing game and compared it very much like a seasoning, just in the way Ryan did here. And I think if you were to take any of what we talked about and just change the word horror to pretty much anything else, you're going to get a pretty good mixture. And I also think it's something really important to bring up is that Ryan, you're a good cook. I'm not. I'm a terrible cook. I burn everything, but my wife's real complaint is that I over season everything. I don't know what elements to add, so I add too much of everything and ruin every meal that I try and cook. Now, you'd think I would have learned by now, but I really haven't. But that's besides the point. What this really comes down to is sometimes you have to make hard creative choices about what your project is and is not going to be. Now, I've been daydreaming about different adventure modules I've wanted to write for 10 years. I have such a backlog of cool shit I want to produce. It's not even funny, it's actually kind of concerning. But with that, I kept early on in writing His Heinous Harvest, kept trying to take ideas from my old adventures and just overstuff things that didn't work for the initial concept. And I really had to pull it back and think, what are my main pieces I'm Frankensteining this out of? So a cool rule in I don't know if it's a graphic design thing or what, but I've heard it a bunch, is the 60-30-10. A good way of kind of roughly just mentally divvying up proportions on how you want things or your elements of composition, let's think about it, is a 60-30-10 rule. So you could do 60% lower high fantasy or military sci-fi or whatever else you do Wild West. Then you want to add like a 30%. What is that other flavor I might add in? And you want to look for things that not just complement but contrast. Why is this different? How does its shape change the rest of the form and how I view it? I can only imagine something like that beautiful sculpture of David, but with like a mouth of Sauron mask, all distorted and terrible. One little element can change everything. So you got to be really careful about what seasonings you're putting into this dish and have a goal, an intention. What is the end desired result of what I'm trying to do here? And I think to keep that fundamental line throughout the creation process, especially in its early stages, don't lose track of what you're actually trying to do here
Right.
and take things one bite at a time. You don't become a black belt by learning backflip 360 super fire dragon kicks on your first day. No, you get your ass whooped a lot. And learning anything's no different. So with this, be patient and try different things. Why not bust out some graph paper and make a couple fake comp copies of whatever you want to do and really think about these elements you want to put into the adventure or resource you're designing.
Yep.
Sorry for whew, huge breath there.
Yeah, and honestly, like that's and our mentor Jim Wampler is here in chat as well.
Oh, I'm a failure.
There we go. Scientific barbarian hat. Sweet.
I should have known better.
But Jim says that I'm talking about cooking, but it also sounds like painting and art. And like for people who don't realize, cooking it is an art as much as it's like preparing stuff to eat to keep yourself alive. There is an art to cooking as well. That's why it's called the culinary arts in some circles. What you're talking about there with that 60-30-10, it's the same as the rule of three in cooking: your protein, your starch, and your vegetable, with the protein being the main body of the meal, your starch being an accent, and the vegetable being kind of a further addition to round out the flavors and bring some lightness into the meal. That's
You nerd. I love it. I wish everyone could see a photo of what you sent me around Christmas time and your countertops covered. It looked like ancient nobilities, like feasts of feasts for some. What was I'm jealous I don't live closer. I would have made a drive just for that. You know
Mhm.
cooking.
Yeah, that was most of that was stuff that I and my wife had made. Some of that was our neighbors, but we had a dessert party over Christmas,
I'll
and
say.
but yeah, to continue kind of with the same metaphor. One of the things that a lot of people kind of get intimidated by when it comes to creating and when it comes to cooking, just to stick with my metaphor here, although with your medium art it's the same. Everyone's afraid in the beginning to stick to basic concepts, to work off of readily available templates. And what I'm thinking about with cooking specifically is recipes. Everyone's afraid to stick to a recipe in the beginning, but when you're doing when you're working off of a recipe, or when you're working off of an established formula, an established methodology of creating,
Hmm.
you are training yourself in the fundamentals.
Yeah.
You're learning how to compose a meal, and that's kind of why I'm talking about this in these terms. You pay attention to things like that. You learn these rules so that eventually you can start to use these rules in interesting ways. You can start exploring the boundaries of these rules, where if we're looking at this from a 60-30-10 perspective, and you're creating a meal that's 60% protein, 30% starch, 10% vegetables, what if you start playing around with those ratios?
Yeah.
Then you start creating uh different kinds of meals, or you start kind of increasing numbers, decreasing numbers. At some point you are now playing with this formula while still keeping it intact. It's still within the boundaries of what um constitutes a proper meal, and but you're now adding your own elements of expression to it, but you can only do that when you grasp the fundamentals.
Oh, it's true. You stick to what you know, and it's one of my biggest, I'm not going to say failings. It's going to be one of my longest learned lessons in life because it's something I still struggle with to this day. I want the flashy cherry on top. I want the
Yeah.
whipped cream. When I was a skateboarder, I didn't learn how to ollie. Initially, I spent all my time trying to learn how to kickflip, and it doesn't make sense. I want to put the cart before the horse with everything I do. And still to this day, I'm 10 years in the game and I'm like, damn, I really need to study my fundamentals more. And I mean, in art, that's a thing that haunts you forever, sure. But like, once you get a good grasp, you're set. But it's true, you can't neglect the building blocks of what you're doing, because as soon as you throw away that set theory, everything kind of becomes spaghetti soup. But knowing how to work within what's been set there and what works, well, you have an infinite playground to play around in. But you do have to put in the time to start understanding that language. And I think learning to speak is a really um, comparable analogy as well, and that's something anyone can understand. Is if you listen to a toddler, they kind of speak in that garbage. Um,
Very familiar with that.
oh, I'm sure. Um, and if you don't learn how to speak clearly and fluently, your rap music's going to sound like garbage because you can't pronounce a word. You're not going to be able to make any language, like you need to have fundamentals.
Hmm. Yeah, and
Sorry, I've
that's
been listening to a lot of mumble rap lately, and some of it makes me really mad. My friends and I've started sharing a playlist, and like half of this, I'm like, I hate you so much. Other stuff, I'm
yep.
like, okay, okay, this bumps. Anyway, sorry.
You know that, and this gets into one of the elements I wanted to talk about tonight. To get in the ring, to actually enter this creative space and be taken seriously and be a contender, if we're, continuing with that analogy of getting in the ring, you have to be a student of the game. You have to not just have some initial training under your belt, you have to continuously be learning and have this continuous mindset of the class is never done. I am never I've never learned everything. Every chance you get to pick up a new technique, learn something new about, adventure writing or fiction writing or cooking or, whatever it is you're doing. Every chance you get to learn a lesson, every failure that you have is a chance to learn a new lesson. You have to be open to this idea of, I don't know anywhere near everything and I never will know everything. So while I'm in here, yes, I am doing this actively. I'm in the ring, I'm competing, I am fighting for my life, but I am also learning how to fight for my life every single time I step into this ring.
Yes. And it's important, I think, to be able to separate your quote unquote training and your practice. Now, this might just be for dungeon designers or whatever. This might just be with your graph paper, writing down your notes and refining and going through things or coming up with a cool first draft for something, whatever that may be. Um, oh no, did I just lose my train of thought? It was a good one. What were you just saying? I'm so sorry.
I was talking about how basically the lessons never end and you never stop learning. You have to be a student of the game continuously.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so with that, I think it's really important to be able to separate when are you actually trying to put in your best efforts and go through and follow through and make this project that you're dreaming to go through with, or are you actually just diddling around and coming up with cool ideas? That doesn't mean one can't spark the other, but I've found personally important to kind of organize my writing and design time kind of around that idea of like, am I trying to work on my finished work right now and really put in effort towards that, or am I in my like brainstorming coming up with new idea stuff? So I think having a focused mindset when you're actually coming to the drafting table, the design board, whatever you're doing, is going to be very important, because otherwise you might just get lost in the weeds. That's something I faced a lot in my first couple months of writing this adventure. Was I would just start off on something and be, oh, what's this over here? What's this over here? And this kind of draws back to our last point of focus on the fundamentals. What's the actual, dungeon you're designing here? What's the storyline going on? Everything that goes into that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is important to have those moments of what my friend Crafty Matt calls the lab time, where you're practicing. You are basically you're not approaching this as if like this is your competition right now. You're not writing for the actual project. You're just kind of working through ideas, working through something that occurred to you in the shower or something like that. This is a very important creative process, and there are definitely times to experiment with this. Um, and one of the things that I think this actually does when you exercise your mind in this way as a creative, when you find yourself in situations where this is for real, this is for the big project, this is going into, the draft, and you find yourself backed into a corner, you can lean on some of that flexibility you've picked up in your training time to get you out of that situation in a creative process. Maybe the idea that you are thinking about during your kind of brainstorm time, it's not fully fleshed out. It doesn't really stand on its own. But then you find yourself in a situation where, well, God damn it, how do I get out of this situation that I have written myself into or that I've designed myself into? Then that idea that you were brainstorming and workshopping earlier, maybe that's the right shape to fit right into this corner that you've designed yourself into, and it's the perfect thing to get you out of it. But you only know that if you are willing to take the time to fully explore those ideas in the creative equivalent of training.
It's true. It's important. And I think there is two different distinctions that are going to be important to make here because they level up very differently. There is creative training and there's technical training. So a good example is I'll give you one for each. Technical training. I was borderline a high school dropout. Thankfully wasn't, but my writing skills were not up to snuff when I started this venture here. I feel like I've gotten a lot better. Something that's helped me personally was I actually went through, this seems like a great waste of time. Maybe it is. I don't know. It helped me a lot. I went through and I rewrote B2 because it's one of my favorite adventures. So I sat there with my little podium stand thing I have over here, and I set it up and I rewrote pretty much every line word for word. And then I was like, well, I'm going to do this with my three favorite adventure modules. And so it helped me get into the mind, the kind of design philosophy of what they were going for there. And then obviously you're not trying to publish someone else's work. I'm not saying go plagiarize, but if you're uncomfortable with technical aspects, repeat, do studies of what the masters that you aspire to be like might be a helpful thing to figure out who you kind of want to emulate as far as what things wear. Because pulling from one designer specifically, like if you are, we pulled Jim Wampler's name out of the hat earlier, him, if he was my only go-to guy, I would just be a cheap knockoff. And that is kind of where I started out. You don't want to sell out. You don't want to be like who's come before you necessarily, but you're trying to surpass that and everything that goes into that. You have to vary up your sources and vary up your training and what you're doing. Because if you're training to be creative, you want to be looking around towards all kinds of things. Something I do is I look to old video game levels. I don't have a lot of time for playing video games nowadays, but I'll look to old ones in my memory. So like a good one is Hang 'em High from Halo, or like Rage Fire Chasms from World of Warcraft. All these games I used to play back in the day, and I'll do little things. I don't actually flesh it out like a finished project, but on a piece of graph paper, how would I redesign these encounters? How would I reskin this entire environment and some of the monsters here? You can do little exercises in 10, 15 minutes on a piece of graph paper you stuff in your pocket. It's not hard to come up with creative ideas that you can then work out later. So having design intention, what are you sitting down to accomplish today, is going to be very important.
Mhm. Yeah, the old video game levels, that's an interesting one because something that I've been thinking about recently is Mr. Freeze from Batman Arkham City.
Hmm.
That boss fight is a fight where you can't just take Mr. Freeze head on. Like you can't just run up to him and start hitting the punch button. He's going to kill you if you do that. It's just not a viable strategy. It doesn't work.
Hmm.
So you have to find various ways of sneaking up on him and doing the various takedowns that the game has mechanically programmed into it. But every time you do one, he learns what you did and then cuts off your ability to do that same thing again.
Oh,
So
fun.
so you have to use
Frustrating.
a say what?
Oh, that's frustrating.
Yeah. So you have to use a variety of strategies to ultimately take this guy down. I've been thinking about how to bring that into role playing because it's role playing is so much more open than a video
Mm-hmm.
game. You don't have to program in every single option. But how do you pit players against an enemy that they can't damage with just head on attacks, where they have to be a little bit more sneaky? They have to play with their environment a little bit. And this isn't something that's anywhere near ready for publication. This is just an idea that I'm still working with in my mind. But that, that's the kind of inspiration that I'm looking to as well. And that's something that I
I love
hope
it.
I'll be able to crack at some point.
So, I'm not familiar with your reference, but I love what you're saying because it actually hits the nail on the head for my main point I have been writing about. um, Jesus, my brain is all over the place today. Sorry for the kind of rambly talk I've been given.
Oh, it's all good.
Um, and oh yeah, being able to not just hyper focus on what has been done. Now with Guts and Glory, why didn't we go with this game? Why didn't we go with that game? Why aren't we doing things in the super traditional style? Why aren't we going full board with modern gaming? Why are we going off on our own thing? And because we haven't seen the thing we really want to make. With that, how do I word this necessarily? I'm trying to make it kind of partially brief here. I am freezing up. It's important to look at what has been done in role playing. I love old school D&D. I kind of was brought up with modern games but ditched them pretty quickly. And when you hear people talk about bringing in influences, usually I hear, oh, kind of like Ravenloft, kind of like D'Amberville, kind of like XYZ module,
Hmm.
or kind of like movies, or kind of like this. It's not shameful to bring in outside resources and start plugging them in. I like these game mechanics from maybe a war game, a video game, from chess. I don't know. Some game companies are really interested in exploring different ideas such as that. Like I'm thinking of different card mechanics and things of this nature. And only through trial and error are you going to figure out where you are comfortable as a designer as far as experimenting. It's not shameful to be a bare bones vanilla designer just going off of what has been done before, but I also think it is going to be the way forward for the venturous few to start looking for what has been done outside of what currently exists in D&D,
Yep.
and how much you want to participate in that, because there's nothing wrong with the game as it is. I love D&D, especially old school gaming,
Hmm.
but let's be a little real here. Game design philosophy as a whole has evolved, and as generations go on and new gamers are being introduced, they have whole different sets of expectations about how games are played. And this is something you touch on very frequently with people, is just fantasy's changing.
Yep.
And with that, I think it's going to be very important as any designer kind of starting things up of where am I drawing inspiration from? And I think to intentionally write those down as, here's some outside things. Here's some, maybe a movie that's kind of similar. I liked the vibe of this villain. Here's my Mr. Freeze villain from a video game. Now, how am I going to combine these together? That's the difference between a designer and someone dabbling with a little project, because
Yep.
design is work. It is mental problem solving. That is what a actual, I hate how people use the word concept artist. I'm going to go on a little ramble here. Everyone thinks everything is concept art, and it's not. It is
Right.
a real thing of how to visually portray an idea and to actually explain something, not just a cool character you drew once. And I think. Do you want to take the reins for a little bit? I'm about to just go off and start rambling more. I'm
I mean,
sorry.
like, look, you're onto something here with the concept art idea. Let's fully explore this
Yeah,
because
help
this
me out
is
here. I don't want to just go in the weeds and drag this out.
yeah, but like I think you're onto something here. Rather than drag it out, let's see if I can take a swing at this and
Please.
see the point that you're making. When you set out to design something, like there needs to be some intentionality to it. Um and when you start playing with ideas that don't necessarily fit together and start trying to fill in those gaps, that's where real design comes in. Here, Jim Wampler again in chat, concept art does not equal pinup art. That's 100%.
Thank you,
There's
Jim.
you
Yes.
can put something together on paper, from an artist perspective that looks cool, but what purpose is it serving? Is it there to be
Yeah.
like, oh, here's this thing in my head that seems like a cool visual concept, or is it, here's this thing in my head that's a cool visual concept that ties into these other concepts that I want to explore? um
Yes.
here's a drawing of a giant monster, but along with this drawing of a giant monster, here's kind of this exploration of what this monster is doing in kind of bullet point forms. Where did this thing come from? Why does it look the way that it does? Why are there all of these weird, intricate, interesting details on them? Is this Here, I'll use the dragon that we did in O Night Divine as an example. Why is the dragon covered in ice? The reason that I came up with for why the dragon is covered in ice is it is basically an ice sculpture reassembly of a deceased dragon lord that they're trying to reanimate. And so this dragon covered in ice, it's a cool visual, but it ties in thematically to the overarching plot. Plot as in, like, this is what the villains are trying to do, not plot as in storyline, uh, of O Night Divine.
Right, and I think you tackled that issue beautifully because it really was. You came up with this cool idea, and what I was just writing down was design is the process of turning a cool idea or a set of ideas into something gameable. And
Yeah.
for us at least, that's kind of what it is. It's, how do I inflict challenge upon the party? Because that's what a DM's job is, in my opinion. You have to
Yep.
inflict challenge, because they will try to avoid it at every circumstance. They will skate around every problem as slippery as butter on a pan.
Mhm. Yep, you inflict challenge up until, and I know this is a point that the two of us kind of differ on, which might actually be a concept to talk about in
Ooh.
a future episode. You inflict challenge upon the players until they get to a point where they start inflicting challenge upon themselves and each other.
I kind of just see what happens at that point in time, usually. Let things
Yep.
resolve.
Then you go from the kind of catalyst and reactor to what the players are doing to the referee.
I'm just the guy that starts the engine. I don't know where we're going.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so I think we have a really good idea on what is a designer and how do we get these influences. Starting a project, where do you actually begin with this? Like, is
Mm.
that something you want to tackle today, or is that a whole episode in itself,
I
honestly?
think we can kind of jump into that.
Okay.
Because this is something I ran into with Nighthaven.
Mm-hmm.
Nighthaven was not always a role playing world. Um, Nighthaven was going to be a series of novels at first, and
Still
then
maybe.
still maybe, like, we'll see. Um, for right now, there's going to be short stories and then game stuff, but you have to. Gelatinous Rube has a point here in chat. You have to define your scope.
Yes,
You
yes.
have to you have to know what you want to do with this project. What You have to know what it is. You have to know, am I writing a book? Am I doing a role playing game world? Am I doing a game rule set in and of itself, and you have to define your scope of it. You have to,
Ooh. Can I ask you a question? This leads me to a really good one.
yeah, go for it.
So, where do you sit on this? You define a scope for the project you want to make. Okay. And here's my personal example. HHH. I had a dream once. It was really creepy. It was about a hillbilly cabin where they murdered people, kind of Texas Chainsaw Massacre vibes, right?
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I wanted to write a quick 12 to 24 page adventure, but I knew in my heart that I could make it something more, something better. And so I decided to chase that to the farthest end to where I just said, no, I couldn't be more happy with this. How does that come into play? Because that is a problem I personally face, and I'm not trying to like pull a trick on you. I'm looking for your opinion. How does that happen? Now, I know brevity's important for sure, but what if you know it can be more? How do you know when? Because here's something I was asked recently by my uncle, is how do you know when a painting's done? Couldn't you just sit there and fiddle with it and keep making it better for years? And people have done that throughout history.
Yep.
Where do you call it quits? How do you even set a scope?
I think this is part of understanding the idea that you're working with.
Mm,
So
okay.
when you have a concept, you have to, before you set the scope of your project and before you start kind of thinking about it in project terms, how far can you take this idea? Like how much further do you keep adding just kind of naturally going?
And then when does it start to become beating a dead
Yeah,
horse?
and when does it start to feel like you're just now like adding features for the sake of adding features? Once you get to a point that feels natural, that's where you stop, and that's where you kind of have your overall view of what this project is. And if you are wanting to work on a specific idea, you then set your scope based on the parameters of here's kind of naturally where this project fits. Sometimes it's not that easy. Sometimes you think, "Oh yeah, I can take this Texas Chainsaw Massacre inspired idea and I can make it fit within 12 to 24 pages." You sit down and start thinking out and realize, "No, I need more than that."
Mm,
At that point, you have to make a decision. Do I run with the idea and push this idea further and widen my scope, set myself a wider parameter, or do I stick with the scope that I've set for myself and find a concept that fits within it? Find something that I can, make fit within the scope and save this idea for later when I want to focus more on kind of a wider scope project. That's kind of where I'm leaning.
right.
Um,
I think I'd agree with that. And it's a very personal decision that I think every creator is going to have to make on their own for their own project is really trying to, are you able to do it justice with less? If not, because I don't particularly put a lot of love towards minimalism as a design philosophy. I know there are some who do. Good on them, gold star and a big cookie. But that's not me. So it's one of those things where I think it's going to be a very hard thing for a lot of creators who are really wanting to jump in is to decide and easily get overwhelmed when you just realize like I do have a cool idea with this one. This is a really cool nugget and I could make it into something. But that's a bigger and bigger project the more you kind of invest into it. Then it becomes intimidating. How do you tackle
yeah,
that part?
and King Yellow makes a good point here, and I think this kind of dovetails into another portion of this conversation. King Yellow mentions that's why you have an editor in writing and the guy with a club when you're painting. If you're not doing enough, you get hit. If you're doing too much, you get bonked
I
out.
love that.
That's
It's
that's pretty
fair.
great. But like,
That's yeah.
when you look at historic paintings, especially the paintings that have survived, and I'm thinking particularly of like Renaissance art,
Makes sense.
these are patronage pieces for the most part. Like the Sistine Chapel, uh, that was commissioned by the Pope, and Michelangelo was painting essentially to the Pope's specification and desire. Like, at the end of the day, Michelangelo could be, still hanging from the roof of the Sistine Chapel painting, but if the Pope told him to stop, then he's going to stop.
Yeah, it's true.
You don't always have that as an artist. You don't always have a patron who is going to tell you when enough is enough, when they're satisfied with the work that's being done. But what you should have is communion with other artists. You should have, if it's not an editor, another creative, another writer that you can go to and say, hey, I've gone this far with this idea. And that person should be someone that you trust to either tell you, oh, you've gone that far? I think you can go even further. Or I think you've gone far enough, or you've gone way too far, rein this back in.
Yes. This speaks to something I was actually looking for a long time in this book that I really enjoy called The Compound Effect by, I believe the guy's name is Darren Hardy. Anyway, a big thing he kind of points to later on in the book, I think, is that when you're kind of going through a big endeavor and something like this, is it can be very helpful to have a quote unquote accountability buddy. And essentially, that's kind of just a weekend check-in creative partner where you can talk and vent your creative frustrations to, and that kind of a thing. Just have a someone to have a touchstone with that you will feel emotionally accountable towards. So if they say, wow, you didn't do dick this week, you actually feel ashamed.
Yeah.
It's important. And it's been so nice because I don't think I would have made nearly as much progress as I have without having our weekly talks. Because every Thursday, for those of you who don't know, Ryan and I hop on a phone call and have an hour or two of chat, and it'll run from anything from just casual friendly hangouts to actual, okay, so how would you combat this? Okay, so another room here, and maybe we turn something like that. What do you think about this kind of a extra musket edition? Anything and everything. It's been incredibly helpful.
Mm.
I just not not just the information that gets passed between us, but it is a repeating cyclical milestone marker of having to explain your progress to someone. That can be harsh if you don't make a lot of progress, you know?
Yeah.
It's kind of the equivalency maybe of almost having a homework turn in, as far as that weird guilt and shame you feel if you don't have the paper to turn in. Like, yeah, I didn't make the mark on this.
Mm. And there really is something to this idea of the person that you choose to be your like accountability partner either being someone that you respect immensely or someone that you are working like in concert with. And that's not to say that I don't respect you immensely. I do. Uh,
Okay. I'm just kidding. Watch
but
me get all hurt. I'll start crying.
the at the end of the day, the thing that kind of pushes both of us with these kind of weekly meetings that we have is if I don't get something done, I then have to face my business partner and tell them I didn't get anything done. And what's that going to do to both of our projects? What's that going to do to the overall vision? And so we have that with each other, but we also early on we had this more so, but to an extent we still have it. We were
Love.
brought together by Jim Wampler. And so at the end of the day, if we just like completely crap the bed
Mm,
and don't do anything, like we just let our project fizzle out, um, we either tell everyone, the Kickstarter money's gone or we, refund it all. We then have to look Jim Wampler in the face and go, we didn't do it. We didn't try hard enough.
Oh, how shameful I feel just hearing those words. No. You speak truth on that. And that's. I wasn't sure if I was going to touch on this at all throughout the talk. It's been immensely important and helpful throughout my life is finding, developing, and cultivating mentor figures. And I don't I love my mentors, don't get me wrong. I
Yep.
don't love the word mentor because I think people have a really weird and skewed idea on exactly what that means. Oftentimes, it comes in the form of having a really cool friend who knows more shit than you and is willing to spend time with you to help you along. And
Yeah.
it's hard to talk about because some of this comes down to social intelligence, and that's the bare truth of it, is you need to be mentorable. And there have been times where I have been and times where I have not been. There have been times where I have needed certain mentors and where I have not needed certain mentors, like just because I'm not focused on this thing right now. And as we grow and change and build our social spider webs of people out, it's important to connect with people that are doing the thing you want to do, but also people that you can, I don't want to say latch on to, but kind of back to the whole parentage thing of who are you really trying to emulate here? Because if you can actually talk to these people, a lot of the old school game design people are still alive. You
Yep.
can ask them questions. Do you know how much knowledge I've been able to gain in 10-minute hallway conversations with Tim Kask? It's immensely beneficial for the rest of my life. It's changed everything for me. Now, what does that mean? To be mentorable, you have to be. Don't be a kiss ass. I found that out.
Yep.
Found that out quick. People don't really respond well. Um, you have to show a genuine interest in the things that they're doing, that that you want to do. You have to be not necessarily show promise, I don't think. People way beyond my skill level and where I should have been were trying to help me out before I should have earned it, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Like when I first started drawing, um, I was getting a lot of help from really important D&D people, and it's an amazing thing. It really did wonders for my career, but I also realized how much of a fool I was because I didn't study those fundamentals that we were talking about. I was just coming into things and being like, who are the people designing shit? I want to talk to you about how you did that, and just found out you could do it. Don't do that. Horrible way of gaining mentors. It works for me, but um, also could be seen as very intrusive. So I think finding a couple people that are doing the thing you want to be doing and at least shooting them a message. What's the worst they do is just not respond, you know?
Yep.
Hey, and have good questions when you're doing this. I mean, it's cool to have friends. That's something I was talking about is you develop friendships with mentor figures. You might start as friends and then they start teaching you shit. But I wouldn't come at this from the point of being a fake friend so you'll teach me things. That's weird and
Right.
creepy.
Hmm.
I think I'd be honest about, hey, I'm trying to learn and I don't know what I'm doing. People respect humility, coming at it from a humble attitude of, I want to learn to design my own dungeons too. Well, what
Yep.
do you got to, can you help me?
Hmm.
Have a good question ready. They're ready for you. People want to pass this torch.
Yep. Yeah. And that's the interesting position we find ourselves in role playing specifically. We have a we have this older generation of designers, gamers that have been looking for somewhere to pass the torch, and there have not been any ready recipients, it seems. There there have been a couple people who kind of position themselves as heirs to the throne, but they've all kind of fallen by the wayside, just one right after the other.
I don't want to ask a loaded question. Um, I'm not exactly sure who we're talking about right now, I'm not gonna say give me an example and name drop, but is this like YouTube OSE crowd that you're kind of getting at, or where are you?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
specifically what I'm referring to is kind of like what's become of the OSR.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
The the OSR was supposed to be this movement of let's return to the traditions of gaming, and what it fell back on was, hey, do you remember the 80s? And
Yeah, you nailed it.
and
Oh,
and hey, how many times can we release BX?
yeah.
And what we're seeing right now is that's just not gonna cut it.
Yeah, and young people are really not adapting to the rules fundamentalism for the most part.
Hmm.
That's something I've noticed in some branches of old school scene is like, if it isn't from the 70s, it's dead to me, and that doesn't leave any room for growth. Have fun in your withered fucking garden.
But like, there's this
Total
new
stab right there.
yeah,
Sorry.
there is this kind of new movement of people, and Rex Teal is pointing out, I see quite a few people in this community that seem very mentorable. There
Agreed.
are people like um the Basic Expert and Victor Gorchev, and even like Kelsey Dion. I've not read Shadow Dark, but it seems like she is approaching this game in a way that is new and interesting and kind of open to mixing the old and the new. And again, this is just from a completely ignorant perspective because I've not read Shadow Dark. But there are people who are seeming to pick up this torch, and Wonkee and I are two of them. We're like, we want to take this torch from the old school, and we want to kind of bring about some kind of paradigm shift in role playing games. But this is where we're starting from. And this starting point is coming to these people that we idolize, these people that we have viewed as mentor figures from a distance, and saying, hey, I want to be in your position. This is my starting point. Can you help me get to the next level? Can you impart some wisdom on me? And then demonstrating a receptiveness to that wisdom is the other side of that coin.
Yes. Um, yeah. Oh, there's a lot of different thoughts to unpack there. The receptiveness is something I want to circle back to since that was what you have said pretty immediately. Can I ask a personal question?
Yes.
Okay. How did you feel emotionally? Like how did you feel when you heard the review that our editor did of O Night Divine? How did you hold up through that? Because when I first started taking criticisms and learning what being mentorable is being a good student, not getting butthurt and being rage lashy every time someone says something that you disagree with. How did you do taking critique for like the first time as a creative, I guess, if that makes sense?
I felt exposed.
Mm,
I
elaborate.
felt like someone was point I felt like I was the naked emperor walking through the streets, and someone just said, he's not wearing any clothes.
I could see that. Yeah.
And I realized, I was just like, oh, no. This thing that's being said is like, it hurts, but it's correct. And yeah, I can sit here and be like, nuh all day. What what's that going to get me? Like, I feel this emotional impact from it because it's correct.
Mm-hmm.
And I
And you
recognize what,
know it. It's
yeah,
undeniably correct.
yeah. And so now it becomes, how do I shore up this weakness so that next time I walk by this guy, he's not going to immediately shout, hey, he's naked.
And that's being a designer, is saying, I have a problem. What do I do to fix this?
Yep.
This is why you study. Now, you don't come into this saying, I'm going to read 50 D&D modules and rewrite them like the Wonkee was talking about. That's dumb. You look at what you're doing, and then I think it's a military thing, UDA, observe, orient, determine, act. Redirect yourself. What do you need at that point in time? My writing was trash, so I did a writing boot camp. Now my writing's tolerable to an editor kind of. The eh, it's better. And I'm going to keep doing that. And I'm going to keep doing that because I want to get good at this. I want to get really good at this so that we can really create the fantasy style and reinvigorate the genre we care about.
Mm,
Um, I can't do that with mediocre skills. And
right.
that's why we train. Is I say, wow, this painting I just did is so beautiful. I don't think I've ever created anything so pretty. I really am happy with it. But my perspective's still wrong. My human figure still needs work. Her hair looks like wax. And you reevaluate. You figure out what you need. You
Mm,
figure out how to get that. And that's where mentors, that's where your circle of other creatives comes in. And then you have to actually act on it. And that's where it really comes down to how many times did you rewrite Corpse Walk? Because I think I did 3 or 4 complete rewrites of his Heinous Harvest, and for 100 pages of adventure, I was ready to bite my fingers off. I had to take a month off from thinking about that project. It's been so nice being flooded with commission work.
mm.
I'm finally ready to be like, okay, can start finishing this baby off.
Corpse Walk, I haven't done a full scale rewrite of it, but there have been multiple points of reading what I just wrote, going back and rewriting like
mm,
portions of it.
gotcha. That makes sense.
And that's been ongoing.
Right. Yeah, being able to yeah, get in the ring. That's our whole thing. I'm going to use fight analogies. What have I been doing? Get in the
Mm,
ring. You're going to get punched in the teeth. It sucks to fail, and you have to stand back up if you really want to make a meaningful creative work. You don't just get to do that. Here's the reality. Everyone has dreams. Everyone has cool ideas. Everyone has a vision that inspired them of, wow, what about this fire volcano dungeon? I've thought it up, but I've dreamed it up on graph paper. Yeah, now comes the work. And this is what separates a designer from every fucking other person is it's hard. It doesn't get easier. You get better at it. You get way better at it. You learn more. You learn tricks. You learn workarounds and loopholes and cool things to add. And, then you start expanding and pulling other inspirations and resources. But you have to know what you're talking about first. And then you got to start slowly chunking things. And as the band Caius once said, waiting is hard. Fuck, it takes so long. It's not an easy, quick process. Design is hard. This is creative problem solving at a fundamental level of both game mechanics, believability plays into it, as well as interest storytelling. There's so many gears to this. So to get good, you have to try. You have to try
yep.
really hard, and you got to keep trying.
And before we kind of get away from this concept of mentors, there's a point here that Gelatinous Rube makes,
Ooh,
and then I've got a kind of an analogy that goes along with this. Mentors are taking partial responsibility for your success or failure. It needs to be
wow.
taken seriously by all parties involved. Um, to lean on one of my old reliables here, I've got a wrestling analogy for
Oh,
you guys.
jeez.
Um, Back in the day, when the secrets of wrestling were very well protected by the people in the industry, people who wanted to get into wrestling had to go through this process of finding a wrestler, telling them, I want to get in the business, I want to do what you do, being told basically to get bent and fuck off in every single possible way repeatedly until at some point the wrestler would say, all right, you want to get in the ring? Brings them into the ring and then proceeds to beat the crap out of them for real. That's how you originally got broken into the wrestling business. And they did this because wrestling was a closed fraternity. It was very much like La Casa Nostra. The secrets were guarded, and if you brought someone in, you were responsible for that person's conduct and behavior. So this whole process of pushing away, pushing away, pushing away, and then beating you down to see if you're tough enough. That was a process of making sure that you would not make the person who broke you in and trained you look bad. Now, I'm not saying find a mentor who's going to beat the crap out of you, but be ready. to prove to your mentors that you are worth the time they're going to put into you. Be willing to prove that you are not just going to listen to what they say and it'll go in one ear and out the other. You have to be ready to stand in front of these people and demonstrate that you're listening to them.
That's very, very true. I got one more thing about mentors. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So, I don't know really how to say this in a nice sugar-coated way. I'll try and use an analogy here. Not everyone that is hiking the mountain and is higher up than you is necessarily someone you want to learn from. You can
Right.
appreciate that they are higher up than you right now, but they might not be going to the same mountain peak. And so to really uh, be not careful, but really put thought, be mindful about your influences you're putting into your adventure, who you're drawing inspiration from, what you're drawing inspiration from, the presentation, the methodology, everything that goes into it. Think about this like it's something you care about and you're responsible for making into a real thing if you want to be a good designer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, you've got to know who you're getting involved with and can they get you to where you want to be. That's important as well.
Right. Can I run an idea by you, Mr. Ryan?
Yeah.
It's very, very relevant to what we're talking about. We've been talking about finding good community of people like-minded. We've been talking about finding, your accountability buddy, finding good mentors. A lot of this is reliant on other people, though at the end of the day, all the work comes down to you. No
Yeah.
matter how much I wanted to find someone that would write Bella Follow for me, it's stuck in my brain, not theirs. Couldn't happen. Um, what I think is going to be important is for people to start finding a space kind of geared towards that actual progression of skill sets. Now, what I'm kind of implying is I don't want to do the work for this, to be honest, but I want someone to do it for me. Um, I want an RPG group that's actually focused about getting good at game design, like an actual dungeon dojo where like-minded people compare, contrast, brainstorm, and come up with ideas, because every single RPG group I'm in is either filled with shit posting, auctioneers, or people asking obscure questions about old modules. I don't know of any spaces that are a large, not a large, but a group of people that are really like focused on becoming good game designers. Where is that space?
I've found a couple spaces where those conversations are going on.
Is that the primary focus of them?
No.
Oh, okay. Well,
There's
still, I'm interested.
I mean like there's the one space I'm thinking of hell, I'll say it. There's conversations like this in Basic Experts Gilded server.
Gotcha,
There's
gotcha.
also conversations about like every single other topic under the sun. And so, they're divided up into different categories on Gilded, but there are a lot of people who are kind of in that mindset. Well, not a lot. There are enough people to sustain that conversation over there and that kind of mindset. But I feel like it's not out of the realm of possibility for us to start something like that. If I would say we be very selective in who we
Yes.
bring in.
This is yeah,
Yeah,
this is kind of my point. So what it's hard to word because all I know how to talk about is art. But there's an idea of like the atelier where you have select people learning together from a very specific kind of thing. I am no teacher by any means. That's not my point.
mhm,
Is like, you have a small group of hyper focused people trying to get good at something, not
yeah,
so much of like the, 20,000 person groups. That's a little
right.
far less interesting to me.
Hmm.
But I don't know. I just think something to ponder is like I mean, that's kind of what we're doing with each other already. Is guts and glory is like, let's get good at game design together.
Mhm.
I don't know. As we move in the future, maybe that is something we should look into, is like a Facebook group or something. I don't know what people do. See, I'm not the tech guy. I don't know how
Mhm.
this works, but I think I don't know. That's something I'd like to see personally.
Yeah.
Is a dedicated design space for people that are like-minded about actually producing cool shit to like focus on that.
Mhm. Yeah, and that involves, and this will have to be the last point just because we're running up on
Oh, my bad.
time. But when it comes to building kind of these systems of success for yourself, there's an element of ruthlessness that has to go in. You've already mentioned finding someone who is actually going to take you to the height that you want to go, and that's actually going in the direction that you want to go to mentor you. There are a lot of pretenders. There are a lot of people who want to be perceived as designers. Or, I've written articles about people who are artificial designers. They want this street cred that comes with, I make games, because it kind of more involves them in the conversation. It gets people talking about them in a way.
And there's nothing wrong with being a hobbyist. I have to
Right.
add that in as there's nothing wrong with just making one or two cool projects you like.
As long as you understand, as long as you know your role, as long you understand that you are a hobbyist, and that I feel like is vanishingly rare in really any spaces. Everyone thinks they're the next big thing, and in reality, a lot of people are just hobbyists, and maybe would be more fulfilled if they just approached the project as a hobby.
Well, I think there's different levels to it because I would almost counterpoint. I know we're running short on time. I don't like how pseudo professional a lot of the D&D industry is. I think if people treated it more like a hobby, it would be a much more free and interesting place to dwell in oftentimes. Now, I'm not saying it isn't. It's literally where I dwell.
Mhm.
But I do think that I don't know, artificial confines are a real thing sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, and they're like there are walled gardens that don't deserve to be walled gardens. Put it that
Yeah.
way. Um, they present it like this is my fortress, but in reality, it's this is my dumpster, and I'm not a king; I'm a possum. But when you are building these communities, you do have to be kind of ruthless in you want to go to the top, you want to go to the top. Let's see if we can find a way to the top together and not kind of letting the unserious people into that fold. You like you not saying completely, cut yourself off from hobbyists or anything like that, but have serious conversations with serious people.
It's a fine line to tread there
It
about,
is.
who makes what calls where, when, why.
Mhm.
um, because someone might view themselves as like, I am trying to be a very serious designer, but it's just I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with that. And there's a lot of things that can occur, and I don't know. I typically we could get into an hour-long conversation about gatekeeping. That's not what I'm interested in.
Right. But there's a phrase that you use a lot.
Like-mindedness, though.
I've heard you use this phrase in our conversations privately. You might have even said it on the show before.
Oh dear.
There is an element though of steel recognizes steel.
Yes. Yeah. A gun
L-
recognizes another gun.
I think leaning on that feeling, if you can humble yourself to the point of realizing that you need to learn, but realize that there's this fire burning inside of you that like this needs to happen. There, like you have kind of the spirit of steel inside you, and you will recognize that spirit in other people.
I
So
like that. That's kind of hokey, but I like it. You know, yeah, that's true. Everyone knows when they're not having a good time at the wrong gym. You know?
yeah.
And that's the thing. Oh, that's a great analogy. I just
Mhm.
want a really intense gym for
Yeah.
dungeon design. That's the easiest way. I'm not trying to shit on anyone else's spaces or be mean or say, like, that's not what I like. That's not my interest at all. I just want to take this really seriously and hyper focus on becoming the best game designer I can be. And I want to do that with like minded people. Let's figure out a way to do that. Where's that happening?
Yeah.
I want to join this conversation.
You want RPG shoot a box.
I don't know what that means.
That's the gym that Vanderlei Silva
Oh,
and
yes.
Shogun Hua and a bunch of the other Brazilian guys who were
That's
killers
exactly what I
in the
want.
2000s came
Yes,
from.
I knew the name sounded familiar. I was just not pulled. Yes, yes, that is exactly what I am looking for. Is like, no, but who wants to like grind down and make a bunch of cool shit?
Yep.
And it seems like that's you. Hey, Ryan.
Yeah.
I wonder who's left. Is anyone still listening to me ramble?
Oh, we got lots of people listening right now.
Those are the real people. Thank you for being such wonderful fans of us. We appreciate you.
Hmm.
Sorry I've been so scatterbrained. For those of you who don't know, it's been a hectic month for me. I've been a little here and there, if you couldn't have told by this interview and talk. I'm working on the craziest art deadline that I ever have. You know, I'm got multiple more all-nighters in the future here. So woohoo, wish me luck with that.
Hmm.
So sorry about that.
Oh, it's all good. Well, guys, that's going to be it for this first edition of Get in the Ring. Like I said, we're going to be doing this every month. So once a month, Wonkie's going to come back on, and we're going to be talking about these creative concepts. Um, we're going to keep doing this because this is good for both of us, and these are conversations that I love to have and that I want more of out there. We don't always have to talk about who's talking about what on Twitter or how Watsy has managed to shoot themselves in the foot by holding the gun in their other foot this time, or
But we
whatever it
could
is
talk
they've.
about how we're still going to write for MCDM, right? Right? That's our game plan?
Yeah.
Guts and Glory MCDM in the future? All the way?
Yep.
Forever? MCDM forever? 1,000 years? It's the future, Ryan. Get with it. Get with it. It'll look weird when my half of the book is MCDM and yours is whatever gobble
Yep.
you're doing.
That's true.
Making up your own game language. Pfft, loser. Right for MCDM.
But yeah, that. God damn it, Wonkee. That's what I want this to be. This is going to be the serious conversations about
MCDM.
MCDM, yes, and Fatal, and Powered by the Apocalypse.
Never heard of those.
Oh,
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
So yeah, that's
one game for me.
That's what we're going to be doing with Get in the Ring. I like that name. I'm going to stick
I
with
do
it.
too. I think it's fun. And we can even kind of make it now that we haven't. So this was a weird introductory video, but it really was for our new series, Get in the Ring. We can have it all kind of combatant themed and, even work it into our titles and fun shit like that. And it's exciting, fun, thematic. Fits. I like it. We're going to need a cool banner or something. As if I didn't have enough projects.
All right, guys. Well, that's going to do it for Rollin Bones and Get in the Ring tonight. That's the bell. The final round is over. So we'll be back next month at some point, and we'll be back next week with a regular edition of Rollin Bones. I've been talking to some really cool people about getting on the show. In May, I'm hoping to have Dunder Moose on. I'm hoping to have Harmony Ginger back on. There's a couple people that I've been talking to about coming back on for this show. So that's what we're going to do next month. And of course, Wonkee will be back and back each month and for the foreseeable future. So until then, guys, whether you rolled a 1 or a 20, I'm so glad that you rolled your bones with me, Ryan Howard, and I will see you guys next time.